The sun hung low over the dusty town of Redemption Creek, casting long shadows across the wooden boardwalks. Nobody noticed the lone rider approaching from the eastern hills, just another drifter passing through, or so they thought. But this wasn't just any cowboy. Beneath the weathered hat and dust-covered duster coat rode a man with a purpose darker than the gathering storm clouds above. The outlaws who had claimed this town as their kingdom, who terrorized its people and murdered without consequence, had no idea that their reckoning had just arrived. They didn't know that the quiet stranger tying his horse outside the saloon was the brother of the marshal they de-gunned down 6 months ago. They couldn't have known that every step he took was calculated, every glance measured, every silence loaded with deadly intent. This is the story of how one man brought justice to a lawless town, how the hunted became the hunter, and how sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's patience, preparation, and a promise made over a brother's grave. The stranger dismounted his black stallion with the careful deliberation of a man who had ridden far and hard. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, barely audible over the raucous laughter spilling from the saloon. Redemption Creek had once been a promising mining town, a place where families settled and businesses thrived. Now it was a skeleton of its former self, its heart torn out by the gang that had seized control after the marshal's death. The Crimson Six, they called themselves a band of ruthless outlaws led by a man named Jebediah Cutter, who wore a crimson bandana and a reputation for cruelty that stretched across 3 territories. The cowboy, who gave his name to no one, walked slowly down the main street, his spurs creating a rhythmic jingling that seemed too loud in the oppressive silence that fell wherever he passed. Shop owners peered through dusty windows, recognizing something in his bearing that set him apart from the usual drifters. He carried 2 Colt revolvers, their handles worn smooth from use, and a rifle across his back that looked like it had seen more action than most men would in 10 lifetimes. But it wasn't his weapons that made people stare. It was his eyes, cold and gray as winter steel, eyes that had seen death and dealt it back in equal measure. Inside the saloon, 3 members of the Crimson Six were celebrating their latest robbery. Marcus, quick draw, Sullivan, a wiry man with a scar running down his left cheek, was boasting about how he'd shot a rancher who dared to resist. Beside him, the hulking figure of Thomas Bear McCready laughed, his massive frame shaking the bar stool beneath him. The third, a younger man named Billy Travers, dealt cards with fingers still stained with gunpowder from that morning's violence. They owned this town, or so they believed, and no one dared challenge them, not since they'd made an example of Marshal William Hartley, shooting him down in broad daylight and leaving his body in the street as a warning. The stranger pushed through the saloon doors, and the celebration died as quickly as a candle flame in the wind. He walked to the bar, his movements economical and precise, and ordered whiskey. The bartender, an old man named Chester, who had served the marshal his last drink, poured with shaking hands. He recognized something in this stranger's profile, the same strong jaw, the same proud bearing, but he kept his observations to himself. In Redemption Creek, loose lips meant a quick trip to Boot Hill. Quick Draw Sullivan sized up the newcomer with the practiced eye of a predator assessing potential prey. He saw the quality of the stranger's weapons, the confidence in his stance, and something else, something that sparked recognition in the primitive part of his brain that warned of danger. But pride and whiskey made men stupid, and Sullivan was full of both. He stood, his hand hovering near his pistol, and called out in a voice meant to intimidate. The stranger didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the challenge. He simply drank his whiskey, savoring it as if he had all the time in the world. This lack of response enraged Sullivan, who took a step forward, his companions rising to flank him. The tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a knife. Every patron held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of violence. But the stranger simply finished his drink, placed a coin on the bar, and walked past the 3 outlaws as if they were nothing more than furniture. He left the saloon without a backward glance, leaving confusion and wounded pride in his wake. That night, as Redemption Creek settled into its usual state of fearful quiet, the stranger made camp in the hills overlooking the town. From his vantage point, he could see every street, every building, every shadow that moved in the moonlight. He didn't light a fire. Warmth was a luxury he'd learned to live without during the war, and old habits kept a man alive. Instead, he sat in the darkness, watching and waiting, his mind running through the information he'd gathered over the past 6 months. He knew everything about the Crimson Six. He knew that Jebediah Cutter kept his headquarters in the old mining office at the north end of town, that he posted guards at all hours, and that he trusted only his second-in-command, a cold-blooded killer named Isaiah Blackwood. He knew that Marcus Sullivan fancied himself faster with a gun than he actually was. That bare McCready size made him slow on the draw, and that young Billy Travers was more scared than dangerous, probably trapped in this life by circumstances rather than choice. He knew their routines, their weaknesses, their vices. Knowledge was power, and the stranger had spent months gathering both. Down in the town, the Crimson Six held court in their usual haunts. Jebediah Cutter sat in the mining office, counting the take from their latest robbery, while Isaiah Blackwood cleaned his guns with methodical precision. Cutter was a tall man with cold blue eyes and a voice like gravel. He'd built his reputation on being faster and meaner than anyone who challenged him, and so far, no one had proven him wrong. But tonight, something gnawed at him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Unease. "That stranger in the saloon today," Cutter said, without looking up from his counting. "Find out who he is." Blackwood paused in his gun cleaning, his dark eyes thoughtful. Sullivan said he didn't seem like much. "Walked away from a fight. That's what worries me," Cutter replied. "A man who walks away from 3 armed outlaws is either a coward or smart enough to know he doesn't need to prove anything. I don't think he's a coward." The next morning, the stranger appeared in town again, this time at the general store. The owner, a widow named Margaret Harrison, whose husband had died trying to stand up to the gang, watched him browse the shelves with an intensity that suggested he was looking for more than just supplies. He bought ammunition, a lot of it, along with dry goods and a new rope. When he paid, his fingers brushed against a photograph Mrs. Harrison kept by the register, a picture of the town's Independence Day celebration from the previous year. In it, Marshall Hartley stood proud in his badge, smiling at the camera. "He was a good man," the stranger said quietly, so quietly that Mrs. Harrison almost didn't hear him. "The best," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My husband died trying to help him that day. The whole town watched, and nobody could do anything. There were too many of them." The stranger nodded, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes one man is enough, if he's the right man." He left before she could respond, but his words stayed with her like a promise. By noon, word had spread that the stranger was asking questions, subtle questions about the gang's movements, their numbers, where they slept, where they drank. The townsfolk, sensing something was building, gave him information in whispers and sidelong glances, afraid to be seen helping, but unable to resist the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally come to free them from their oppressors. The stranger absorbed every detail like a sponge, his mental map of the gang's operations becoming clearer with each conversation. That afternoon, he encountered Billy Travers alone behind the saloon. The young outlaw was barely 20, with frightened eyes that suggested he'd seen too much death for his age. The stranger recognized the look. He'd seen it in mirrors during the war, in the faces of young soldiers who'd been forced to become killers before they had a chance to become men. "You don't belong with them," the stranger said simply. Billy's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Something in the stranger's voice wasn't threatening, it was stating a fact. "I got nowhere else to go. They took me in when I had nothing. They're going to get you killed. Soon." The stranger's gray eyes held the young man's gaze. When the time comes, don't be there. That's all the warning you'll get. He walked away, leaving Billy Travers standing in the alley, his hands still hovering over his gun, his mind racing with questions and the first stirrings of genuine fear. The third day brought the first taste of blood. The stranger had learned that 2 members of the gang Quick Draw Sullivan and a man named Rusty Hollins were scheduled to ride out to collect protection money from the ranches in the valley. It was routine work, the kind of easy intimidation that had become second nature to the outlaws. They never expected resistance, certainly not from a lone rider waiting at Devil's Pass, where the trail narrowed between 2 steep rock faces. Sullivan and Hollins were laughing about their plans to terrorize a rancher's daughter when the first shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at them. It ricocheted off a rock face, the sound echoing through the pass like thunder. Both men reined in their horses, hands flying to their weapons. The second shot took Rusty Hollins' hat clean off his head. The third shot hit the ground between Sullivan's horse's front legs, causing the animal to rear in panic. "That's far enough," the stranger's voice called from somewhere in the rocks above. "Turn around and go back to town. Tell Cutter that Marshall Hartley sends his regards." Sullivan's face went white. Marshall Hartley was dead. Everyone knew that. Unless... He looked up at the rocky outcroppings, trying to pinpoint the shooter's location, but the sun was in his eyes, and the shadows revealed nothing. "Who the hell are you?" "Justice," came the reply. "Now ride." The fourth shot took the reins right out of Sullivan's hands. The fifth shot went through Hollins' canteen, sending water spraying across his chest. These weren't warning shots anymore. They were demonstrations of precision. Proof that the shooter could have killed them both multiple times over, but chose not to. The message was clear and terrifying. The 2 outlaws didn't need further convincing. They turned their horses and galloped back toward town, their pride left bleeding in the dust alongside their courage. When they burst into the mining office, their faces pale and their voices shaking, Jebediah Cutter listened to their story with growing fury. But beneath the anger, Isaiah Blackwood detected something else in his boss's expression, the first flicker of doubt. "Marshall Hartley is dead," Cutter said flatly. "I put 3 bullets in him myself. Then it's his ghost, or his ghost hired a shooter," Sullivan stammered. "Boss, whoever that was, he could have killed us easy. He was playing with us, showing us he could take us any time he wanted." Blackwood stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. "Not a ghost, a brother maybe, or a friend. Someone who wants us to know he's coming." He turned to face Cutter. "Marshall Hartley had a younger brother, fought in the war. Word was he became a scout, one of the best." "If it's him, then we kill him," Cutter interrupted. "Same as we killed the marshal. We'll set a trap. Tomorrow night, we'll spread word that we're keeping our money in the bank safe. When he comes for it, we'll be waiting." But even as Cutter laid out his plan, the stranger was already 10 steps ahead. He'd known they would try something like this. He'd counted on it. From his position in the hills, he watched the gang members scurrying around the town like ants, preparing their ambush, positioning their men. They thought they were the hunters, but they were wrong. They'd been prey from the moment he rode into town. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, the stranger made his first overt move. He rode openly down the main street at dusk, not hurrying, not hiding. Every person in Redemption Creek seemed to sense that something momentous was about to unfold. Shop owners secured their shutters. Families huddled in their homes. The few brave souls who dared to peek through windows saw the lone rider pass like a specter of vengeance, his shadow stretching long across the dusty ground. He stopped in front of the mining office and dismounted. The guards posted outside reached for their weapons, but something in the stranger's deliberate, calm movements made them hesitate. He walked to the door, removed a piece of paper from his coat, and nailed it to the wooden frame with a single strike of his knife. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away before anyone could react. When Isaiah Blackwood retrieved the paper, his hands trembled slightly as he read the words written in strong, clear handwriting. 6 men murdered my brother. 6 men will answer for it. 5 remain. The ghost of William Hartley is coming, and hell is coming with him. The psychological warfare had begun, and the Crimson Six, now minus Rusty Hollins, who'd fled town that very night rather than face whatever was coming, would never be the same. The paranoia that infected the remaining members of the Crimson Six was almost tangible. Bear McCready refused to sleep without 2 men standing guard. Marcus Sullivan jumped at every shadow, his famous quick draw now hampered by trembling hands. Even Jebediah Cutter, who prided himself on his iron nerve, found himself checking over his shoulder more frequently than he'd ever admit. Only Isaiah Blackwood seemed to maintain his composure, though his dark eyes now held a calculating wariness that hadn't been there before. The stranger used their fear like a weapon. Over the next 2 days, he waged a campaign of psychological torment that was as effective as any bullet. He left playing cards at the sites where the gang conducted business, specifically the Ace of Spades, traditionally known as the Death Card. He appeared at the edge of town at dawn, visible for just a moment before vanishing into the morning mist. He sent messages through terrified townsfolk, each one counting down the numbers. 5 remain. 4 will die. 3 are marked. 2 are chosen. 1 will beg. The strain fractured the gang's unity. Bear McCready wanted to flee, to abandon Redemption Creek and find easier pickings elsewhere. Sullivan advocated for gathering more guns, hiring reinforcements from other gangs. Billy Travers, remembering the stranger's warning, kept his own counsel and watched for his opportunity to escape. But Cutter refused to run. His pride wouldn't allow it. He'd built his reputation on being the most feared outlaw in the territory, and he wouldn't let one man destroy that, brother of a dead marshal or not. We know he's just one man, Cutter argued during a tense meeting in the mining office. One man, no matter how good, can't take on all of us if we stay together. We fortify this building, keep watches around the clock, and wait for him to make his move. When he does, we end him. But the stranger had no intention of making a frontal assault. He'd learned in the war that the best way to defeat a fortified position was to draw the enemy out, and he knew exactly how to do it. He'd been watching, learning, and he'd discovered that Jebediah Cutter had a secret that he'd killed to protect a woman named Eliza, who lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, a former dance hall girl who Cutter visited when he thought no one was looking. The stranger didn't threaten Eliza. He didn't need to. He simply appeared outside her house one evening, knocked on her door, and when she answered, handed her a letter. "Give this to Cutter," he said quietly. "Tell him to read it alone." The letter contained only a few lines. "I know about Eliza. I know you visit her every Thursday night. I know you take the back trails to avoid being seen. I could have killed you a dozen times over. But I want you to know I'm coming. I want you to feel what my brother felt, hunted, afraid, knowing death is approaching and being powerless to stop it. Tomorrow night, midnight, at the old mission. Come alone, or I'll assume you a coward and start taking your men one by one until you've got nobody left." When Cutter read the letter, something broke inside him. The stranger had done what no outlaw, lawman, or soldier had ever managed. He'd gotten inside Cutter's head, found his weakness, and exploited it. More than that, he'd stripped away Cutter's greatest weapon, his reputation for fearlessness. The gang's leader realized with cold certainty that if he refused this challenge, if he showed fear or called for help, his men would lose all respect for him. The Crimson Six would dissolve, and he'd be just another aging outlaw running from his past. "I'm going," Cutter announced to his men that night. "Alone. If I'm not back by dawn, scatter and don't look back." Isaiah Blackwood studied his boss carefully. "It's a trap. Of course it's a trap," Cutter replied. "But what choice do I have?" He's already beaten us. The only question left is whether I die like a coward or die like a man." There was a strange calm in his voice, the peace that sometimes comes when a man stops fighting the inevitable. As midnight approached, Jebediah Cutter rode toward the old mission on the hill above town. The building had been abandoned for years, its bell tower crumbling, its wooden pews rotting. It stood as a monument to failed hopes, much like the town below. The moon was full, casting silver light across the surrounding desert, making every shadow seem alive with menace. Cutter dismounted 50 yards from the mission and walked the rest of the way, his hand resting on his gun, his senses hyper-alert for any sign of the stranger. The mission's interior was dark, except for a single candle burning near the altar. As Cutter's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw the stranger standing in the shadows near the confessional, his face half hidden beneath his hat brim, his stance relaxed but ready. "I'm here," Cutter called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Let's finish this." "Not yet," the stranger replied. "First, you're going to confess. Every man you've killed, every crime you've committed. You're going to say it all out loud, here in this place, before God if not before man." Cutter laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "And if I refuse, then I'll kill you right now, and the world will never know what kind of monster you really were. But if you confess, if you show even a shred of humanity left in that black heart of yours, I'll give you something your brother never gave mine, a fair chance. Fastest draw wins. One shot, winner walks away." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Cutter realized this wasn't about revenge in the simple sense. This was about justice, about making him acknowledge his sins, about giving him a choice his victims never had. It was cruel and fair in equal measure, and despite himself, Jebediah Cutter found himself speaking, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. Confessions that had been locked inside him for years, finding voice at last in the darkness of the old mission. Jebediah Cutter talked for an hour. He spoke of his first kill at age 16, a gambling dispute that turned deadly. He described the men and women who'd fallen to his guns over the years, some in fair fights, others murdered in cold blood. He detailed robberies, assaults, betrayals. And finally, with something that might have been shame creeping into his voice, he described the day they killed Marshal William Hartley, how the marshal had tried to arrest him for murder, how he'd refused to go peacefully, how 6 guns had opened fire on one lawman who stood alone against them, believing in justice, even when it cost him everything. The stranger listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask in the candlelight. When Cutter finally fell silent, exhausted by the weight of his own history, the stranger spoke for the first time since the confession began. "My brother was a good man. He believed that every person could be redeemed, that the law existed to protect the weak and punish the wicked. He gave you a chance to surrender, to face trial, to accept responsibility. You shot him for it. You and your men put 6 bullets in him and left him to die in the street like a dog." The stranger's voice was steady, but underneath it ran a current of grief and rage that had been building for 6 months. "I don't share his faith in redemption. I don't believe men like you can change. But I'll honor his memory by giving you what he would have given you, one chance." The 2 men walked outside into the moonlit night. They took their positions 20 paces apart, as formal as if they were at a sanctioned duel instead of a blood settling in the desert darkness. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness that seemed to hold the world suspended. In town below, lights flickered in windows where people waited anxiously, sensing that the fate of Redemption Creek was being decided on that hill. "On 3, the stranger said. 1. Cutter's hand moved to hover over his gun, his body tensing. This was what he'd trained for his entire adult life. He was fast, maybe the fastest gun in 3 territories. He could win this. He had to win this. 2. The stranger stood perfectly still, his breathing calm and even, showing no sign of stress or fear. His gray eyes locked onto Cutter's, and in them the outlaw saw something that chilled him to his core. Not hatred, not anger, but absolute certainty. This man had already won. He knew it. Cutter knew it. The draw was just a formality. 3. Both men moved. Cutter's draw was fast, so fast that his gun was out and rising before most men would have cleared leather. His finger found the trigger, applying pressure, the hammer falling. But the stranger's draw was something beyond fast. It was perfection, the culmination of years of practice and war-honed instinct. His gun cleared his holster, came up, and fired in one fluid motion that seemed to defy physics. The two shots sounded almost simultaneous, but there was a fraction of a second between them, enough to make all the difference. Cutter's bullet went wide, fired from a hand suddenly nerveless as the stranger's round caught him square in the chest. The outlaw staggered back, his gun falling from his grip, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward onto the dusty ground. The stranger walked over and knelt beside him. Cutter was still alive, but barely. Blood bubbled on his lips as he tried to speak. Who are you? James Hartley, the stranger replied quietly. William's brother. And you should know the other 4 aren't getting the chance I gave you. They're already dead or run off. Sullivan died of a heart attack last night, too scared to sleep. McReady's horse threw in trying to flee, broke his neck. Travers took my advice and left this morning. Blackwood ... quote. He paused. Blackwood is waiting for me at the mining office. He knows how this ends. Cutter's eyes glazed over, and James Hartley closed them with a gentle hand, showing more mercy to his brother as killer in death than the man had shown to anyone in life. He stood, holstered his weapon, and began walking down the hill toward town. Behind him, the old mission bell, damaged and unused for years, suddenly gave out a single clear note. Whether from the wind or something else, James would never know. But it sounded like an ending, like a benediction, like justice finally being served. In the mining office, Isaiah Blackwood sat at Cutter's desk with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. When James Hartley walked through the door, Blackwood didn't reach for his guns. Instead, he poured whiskey into both glasses and pushed one across the desk. Cutter? He asked simply. Dead. James remained standing, his hand near his weapon. Blackwood nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. I'm not going to draw on you. I'm good, but not that good. I can see it in how you move. Besides, I'm tired. Tired of running, tired of killing, tired of watching my back every second. He raised his glass in a mock toast. Your brother arrested me once, about 10 years ago. I was young and stupid. Thought I was tough. He could vet killed me. I drew on him, but he just shot the gun out of my hand and told me I had a choice. I could keep going down this road and end up dead by 30. Or I could turn myself in, serve my time, and have a chance at a real life. I was too proud to listen. I chose the road, and here I am, exactly where he said I'd be. He stood slowly, making sure to keep his hands visible. I'm leaving. Tonight. Going somewhere the name Isaiah Blackwood means nothing and starting over, if that's even possible. I won't draw on you, and I won't come back. If you need to kill me to settle accounts, I understand. But I'm asking for what your brother offered me once a chance. James studied the man before him. Everything in him wanted to finish this, to eliminate every person responsible for William's death. But he heard his brother's voice in his head, remembered William's lectures about the difference between justice and vengeance, about mercy and redemption. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but James Hartley stepped aside and gestured to the door. Go. If I ever hear you've hurt anyone else, I'll find you. And next time, there won't be any talking. Blackwood nodded once, then walked past him and out into the night. James heard the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance, and then he was alone in the office of the gang that had terrorized Redemption Creek for almost a year. He looked around at the stolen money, the weapons, the evidence of criminality that filled the room. Tomorrow he'd make sure it was all returned to its rightful owners. Tomorrow he'd help the town rebuild. But tonight, he walked back to the old mission, to the spot where Jebediah Cutter lay beneath the stars, and he began digging a grave. Even monsters deserve burial. His brother would have insisted on it. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek with a clarity that felt almost symbolic. As James Hartley rode down the main street in the early morning light, he found the entire town waiting for him. They stood in their doorways, on their porches, lining the boardwalks, every man, woman, and child who had suffered under the Crimson Six's reign. As he passed, they began to emerge, following him, a silent procession of gratitude and grief. At the mining office, James had laid out everything he'd found ledgers detailing every robbery, every extortion payment, every crime. With the help of Mrs. Harrison and a few of the braver townspeople, he spent the morning identifying what belonged to whom, making lists, preparing to restore what could be restored. Money was divided and returned. Stolen horses were reunited with their owners. But no amount of repayment could bring back the dead or undo the trauma that had been inflicted on this community. "We want you to stay," the town's temporary council told him that afternoon. They were a group of shopkeepers and ranchers who'd been too afraid to act while the gang ruled, but who now stepped forward to rebuild their community as governance. "Take your brother's badge, become our marshal. God knows we need someone who can stand up to whatever comes next." James looked at the silver star they offered him, William's badge, recovered from the undertaker who'd kept it as a memento. He held it in his hand, feeling its weight, remembering his brother pinning it on with pride the day he'd been sworn in. William had believed in law and order, in the system, in the idea that society could be governed by justice rather than by might. James had believed in none of those things for a long time, not since the war had taught him that the world was cruel and survival went to the fastest gun. "I can't," he said finally. "I'm not my brother. What I did here, what I had to do, it wasn't law enforcement. It was revenge dressed up in justice's clothing. I bent every rule, crossed every line, became everything a lawman shouldn't be. You need someone who can uphold the law, not someone who operates outside it." "But you saved us," Mrs. Harrison insisted, tears in her eyes. "You did what no one else could or would do." "Maybe," James acknowledged. "But there's a cost to becoming what I became, and it's not something you can just set aside when the job is done. I see their faces when I close my eyes, Cutter, Sullivan, all of them. Not because I regret what I did, but because killing changes you, even when it's necessary. Especially when it's necessary." He placed the badge on the table between them. "Find someone good, someone like my brother, someone who still believes." He left the mining office and walked to the small cemetery on the edge of town. His brother's grave was marked with a simple wooden cross, weathered by the sun and wind. James stood before it for a long time, hat in hand, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did it, Will. I kept my promise. The men who killed you are gone dead, scattered, or maybe, in Blackwood's case, actually trying to be better. The town is free. They'll rebuild, start fresh. Find someone to wear your badge who deserves it." He paused, swallowing hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "I know you wouldn't have wanted this. You'd have wanted trials, due process, the system you believed in. I'm sorry I couldn't give you that. But I gave them justice, the only kind I know how to deliver. I hope that counts for something, wherever you are." As he turned to leave, he found Billy Travers waiting by the cemetery gate. The young outlaw looked different, cleaner, steadier, his eyes less haunted than they'd been. "I didn't run far," Billy said. "Just far enough to not be part of it when it ended. I wanted to thank you for the warning, for seeing something in me that wasn't completely rotten." James studied the kid. He couldn't have been more than 21, probably younger. "What are you going to do now?" "Head north. I got an uncle in Montana, runs cattle. Says he could use help. No questions asked about my past. Billy shifted uncomfortably. I know I don't deserve a fresh start after the things I did. But you gave me one anyway. Don't waste it, James said simply. And Billy, if you ever strap on a gun again, make sure it's for the right reasons. The world's got enough ghosts already. They shook hands, two men who'd been on opposite sides of a war that neither had really wanted. And then Billy Travers rode north toward whatever redemption might await him. James watched him go, hoping the kid would make it, knowing that some debts to the past could never be fully paid. That evening, as the sun set on Redemption Creek, James Hartley prepared to leave. He'd done what he came to do. The town was safe, his brother was avenged, and justice, rough and imperfect as it was, had been served. He had no desire to be celebrated as a hero. Heroes didn't shoot men in the back for tactical advantage. Heroes didn't wage psychological warfare that drove a man to a heart attack. Heroes didn't execute people in midnight duels and abandon missions. They'd been a weapon, nothing more, and weapons should be put away when the war is over. As he rode out of town, heading west toward the setting sun, the people of Redemption Creek gathered once more to watch him go. They didn't cheer or wave. They simply stood in silent acknowledgement of what he'd done, what it had cost, and what it meant. One man, acting alone, had freed them from tyranny. But that one man carried scars that would never heal, had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and had paid a price in his soul that no amount of gratitude could repay. Margaret Harrison, standing at the front of the crowd, whispered a prayer for the stranger who'd saved them all. For James Hartley, the cowboy who'd ridden into town alone and become their worst nightmare, but also, paradoxically, their only hope. He'd been justice and vengeance, mercy and retribution, savior and destroyer all at once. And now he was just a silhouette against the dying light, riding toward whatever came next, forever marked by the ghostess he decreated and the promise he kept to a brother who believed in a better world than the one they'd been given. In the town behind him, a new marshal would eventually be found. Laws would be enforced. Order would be restored. Redemption Creek would live up to its name, offering second chances to those who sought them. But they would never forget the days when darkness ruled their streets or the lone rider who came to drive it away, not with law or justice or civilization's tools, but with the same brutal efficiency that the darkness itself understood. Sometimes the story goes, you need a monster to fight monsters. And sometimes, when the battle's done, that monster rides off into the sunset, leaving everyone to wonder whether they'd been saved or simply exchanged one kind of danger for another. The answer, like most truths, lay somewhere in the uncomfortable middle, a place James Hartley knew better than most, a place he'd be riding through for the rest of his days.